All right, hey y'all, we're back with Timmy, Mark, and Richie. We're going to be doing another episode about our family. And today we're going to get into Red Myler, Kenneth Wayne Myler, our other grandfather. We've had some requests to dive into his history. So, Timmy, what's your memories of Pop Red?
Well, starting out, he was from Council Bluffs, Iowa, right off the Missouri River. And don't know a lot about it. Never been there but once in my lifetime. And probably one of the greatest mechanics I ever knew in my life. And was paired up with Lee in 1959 as the owner. But let's just start. Well, see, I want to start all over.
Okay, let's go back. I think in 1953 he did a stint in the Army.
Right.
And during the Korean War,
he was stationed in Alaska.
And I think he was with the motor pools and stuff up there. So he was doing his mechanicking up there. When he got out of the Army, the way I understand it, him and Tiny Lund, one of his friends, they came chasing the racing because they were already out there racing. Because Pop had a race car that he actually drove.
Other brother that was also called Red.
Right.
But he had a big junkyard out there. Now, we went to that, but go ahead.
But he actually drove some race
and we
car.
didn't know that until just recently.
Right.
You found some pictures in a scrapbook that we found.
But him and his friend Tiny and somebody else was with him. I forget the other person. Anyway, they came south chasing the racing, and they ended up in the mid-50s here in Level Cross.
Working for Lee at Lee Petty Engineering, and based out of Randleman, North Carolina. But now he stayed in Greensboro for a while, and I don't. We're unsure about if Tiny lived with him or stayed with him or where he went. But Tiny ended up being in South Carolina, like down there towards.
After he left here.
Yeah. But he actually
he had a fish camp down at the lake.
Yeah.
Right.
What lake? What, Santee?
The Santee Cooper, but he was on the bottom lake.
Yeah.
Or bottom lake and upper lake.
Yeah. Now I don't know. But yeah.
But Mom always talked about his fish camp down there.
Which I would have loved to went to because I love fish camps, and Pop did too. Yep. But anyway, so later on, maybe towards 1960-ish, in that neighborhood, there was a boarding house right up here at the corner at the big tree that we've talked about in some of our videos. But they were who?
The Caudles, I believe.
And they had a store, I think, on the other side of the road where the current store is here in Level Cross. But they owned the store and the boarding house, and Pop stayed up there. And then worked here in the Level Cross facility.
During that stint, that's when he met our grandmother, Sue Myler. She was working. Sue Pickler,
yeah.
Right, at the time, Sue Pickler, and she was working in a Frank and Larry's or something.
No, Charlie's. Charlie's. Butch Stalker's daddy's place.
Yes,
Charlie's.
Who Butch worked here too for.
But it was right beside Frank and Larry's and the same kind of barbecue and sandwiches.
Okay,
but
you're right.
Yes, she was waitressing at.
Yes.
But now according to Butch, there wasn't but 3 or 4 employees ever at that restaurant, and she was one of them.
Yeah. Amen.
Remember?
Yep.
He told us just a couple of weeks back. So that's all this is kind
but
of.
So they met. And Pop was working down here for Grandfather Petty.
Right.
Was his crew chief, right, for the first day on
the
chief mechanic,
and listed as the owner for 59.
But so they'd go to lunch right up here at Charlie's, and she was waiting tables. They met and
Charlie's place.
But let's go back to the mid-50s when he first came in here with Tiny. Tiny drove for Lee, and
what years was that?
That was 57, because
we got a car like representation.
But they drove them Oldsmobiles. Lee had made a big deal with the Oldsmobile. So he had several cars. He could go run 2 or 3 cars in a race.
Ain't that same year Ralph Earnhardt drove a little?
That's where I was going.
Okay,
I was heading to that Ralph drove for him for about 6 or 7 races. And so here's a funny thing about Ken Myler. We're going to get into a few of them because there's a lot of them. Yeah. But he's actually worked on a car with Ralph Earnhardt. And later in his career, he worked in a car for Dale Earnhardt. So there's probably very few people that worked for both of those guys.
That's exactly right. And I never thought, until you said that, I never thought of that.
Well, then because Pop was a shop foreman at Bud Moore's when Earnhardt drove.
So Pop Red, we're going to move in like we're in the 50s. He kind of was the chief mechanic here. And Grandfather Petty always told us that was the best mechanic he ever hired. That's the best guy, the best thing he ever did as far as Lee Petty Engineering. And then they went on in, I guess, 1958 when Richard Petty ran his first race. Wasn't that in '58?
Yeah, whenever it was.
The
Yeah.
very first race that Richard
had to
Petty.
be because
That Lee and Morris went to a race, and Lee sent Richard and Red Myler and Dale Emmon. They all went to the other race, but we always laugh because grandfather said he sent his best mechanic to go help Richard on his first race, and then he took Daddy with him. So,
But he did. Grandfather Petty had thought a lot of.
Oh, he did. Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
they
I remember
they did to the bitter end. So yeah,
on very few funerals I can remember my grandfather Petty going to, and he went to Ken Myler's funeral. So
Yeah.
that was a big deal for.
So another cool thing is later on, like mid 60-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe 62, 3, 4, 5, Pop moved and had a shop out of Randleman, which was a Ford Holman Moody Satellite.
I think in '61, after grandfather got hurt,
Right.
he laid up there in the hospital.
And he had to make a decision.
Well, the garage basically was on life support, so they had to start cutting
Right,
employees and all that. So it was down to Morris and Richard,
right.
only 2 employees. So they had to make it happen.
Well, that didn't they say a few? I don't know if Pop Red was one of them, but there wasn't many employees. But on one of them videos, I've heard somebody saying that their mechanics left because they were scared there was no future
Right,
left.
that's
Lee
what I
was
was
hurt
yeah.
yeah.
that
But,
long.
but
Yeah.
there wasn't any money coming in hardly. But it started rolling in. But he left and went to I think he went to Jack Smith then.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And went to Spartanburg the first time.
Right, and then he worked for him, and then I believe it was '63 that he came back and had the satellite
Probably.
shop with the Holman Moody. And here's another funny one, or another oddity about Ken Myler. Cale Yarborough's first win in NASCAR Cup racing, Ken Myler was the owner out of Randleman.
Yep.
So
We have a few photos of that car.
Yeah.
Was it the Zero?
So Cale Yarborough's first
I
win
think so.
came out of Randleman, North Carolina, with Ken Myler as the owner.
Another one of his famous, well, to us it was famous, but it was a tangerine orange Ford with the 06, and was it Bob Welborn drove the car, and a few other guys, but he would run like the northern stuff and in the NASCAR, and I think some of the western stuff too, and then that led him, that affiliation, he started doing the Trans Am stuff, and then worked with Bud, but Pop had his own team.
But the bit with Bob Welborn and Pop were working together, and Tiny drove for him, I believe, in 64, 63.
That's right.
Yeah.
But,
Some of them
but
road
Pop
cars.
Red, my memories, Pop Red was a Ford guy.
Yeah.
Through and through.
It was a
Yeah.
Pop Red was but he worked for Ford, so
Bled Ford Blue.
he sure did.
But after he left his shop, and I think that's when he's got hooked up with Bud, like you said.
Yes, sir.
And he never left Bud. He stayed to Bud until he retired. So
Yeah.
So then, as we got older and realized what was going on in the world, Pop was pretty much a cornerstone of Bud Moore Engineering in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And we would go visit them, like to Atlanta, Talladega, anywhere south like that.
Well, and a lot of times, them was our grandparents. We'd go stay a week with them in the summer.
Right.
Like
and then mom and dad
mom and dad would drop us off, go to a race, and come back and pick
Yes,
us up.
many a time. And what was one of our favorite places? Because Pop would get tired of it. Hey, where do y'all want to eat supper at night? We want to go to the Beacon.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
They got sick of that.
The Beacon. Anybody been to Spartanburg knows the Beacon.
Knows the Beacon.
Yep.
Now
And, yeah.
Call it.
Yes.
but the thing was with him
Roast beef.
the thing was with the Bud Moore deal there in the early '70s. Buddy Baker was a driver for Bud Moore, and Pop worked for him. Well, Buddy had worked and drove out of the Petties here from '71 and '72, so our families were entwined with the Bakers
Yes.
through the Petties shops and the Bud Moore shops. So that was a neat thing.
And Buddy, he was always.
I had T-shirts. Remember Buddy Baker, the Big B.
Oh
He
yeah.
had the 15 car right here, like right there.
He was always really. I mean, he's such a big guy, but he's always really cool to us.
Oh, yeah.
Not that we're getting off track, but staying with Pop. But yeah, Buddy was one of Pop's drivers.
Right.
Yeah, Bud Moore's driver.
Right.
The white
But
15.
we still say it's Pops.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but
But
And Bud, that's a whole nother story. But yeah,
But he had, let's see, didn't Bobby Allison, they won Daytona
in '78.
'78 with Pop Red there. With
10 years later at Stavola's,
Yep.
Bobby
Now,
Allison. So we've told that story.
Didn't Bud Moore's then, when they went to small block, am I out of school saying this? When they first went to small blocks, Bud Moore and them had a little bit of advantage because of them Trans Am motors.
I think so. And Bud was a proponent of the small block, and
Because they already had a head start.
and
on it.
went to
Yeah.
Bill France and Bill France Jr. and asked, said, "Hey, this is your answer." It was around the 74ish. So he was a little bit ahead of everybody.
But I always remember Daddy having a great relationship with Bud Moore, and probably maybe because Pop worked down there.
Probably.
But it just seemed like they worked together, especially like in the 80s.
But they were a couple of the only teams that had the Heenan dynos, so he could take his engines down to Bud's and run it
and really compare them.
to compare the engines to the dynos, and Bud would bring stuff up here and run it, so they could
make sure they wouldn't get off on their dyno. They was
right,
really
they
comparing
could,
the engines.
Right, you could understand what you really had. But let's go back to '59
All right.
and the very first Daytona 500. And didn't you say that Pop Red was the first guy through the tunnel when they opened it up?
Story I've always heard, and I think we found a picture the other day, and that was it a GMC truck, and they just however they tow barred the thing in there, but he was in line, and he was the first guy with a car through the tunnel for the first.
Well, he's the first one to sign in a NASCAR sign-in too, right?
For the first Daytona
Right.
500.
Don't you have one of them pit passes?
Probably.
Not only
something there
that,
somewhere.
they went, and both our grandfathers won the race, and I mean, not that we're sitting here bragging, but that's pretty phenomenal.
Yes.
Well, you know my joke. We're like purebred dogs. The more you breed them, the dumber they get.
Yes, but I mean, that's why we still do what we do.
Yep.
It's
Now-
because of that fact.
Well, yeah, and that's our whole family. That everybody knows about the Petty family and you cousins and whatnot. But if you ever was around cousins on Mama's side of the family, Angel, Steve, people like that,
We was all intertwined.
then you most time use it not on Pops in Spartanburg. That's when you was all hanging out.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the different times at home at Mom and Daddy's too, but with
Now they tell
Good
the
times,
story
good
that
memories.
when Pop first he got hooked up and married Donna, and Mama had met Daddy when they were younger, and she despised him. She said he was the cockiest. Just thought he was all for himself and all that. She just despised him, and then after a few years of being around, they finally met up and. I guess they had a change of heart because they stayed
Evidently.
married for 50 years.
Hey, it was just part of their love story.
That's right.
You know what I mean? It really was.
So,
But yeah, she did said he
If
was
it-
a cocky old somebody.
if it
didn't she?
wasn't for Pop Red, then
Probably would have never.
That's right.
Wouldn't
None of
been
us.
on
That's right. That's right. Wouldn't have been there. So that was a good deal.
Another cool story about Pop Red is what year was it? Was you even in existence yet? Did you go?
Well, I don't remember back, but I mean,
I know, but you know the stories. But anyway, and it's like Richie Bars asked me the other day. Do you remember? No, I don't know.
well, you're gonna have to tell the story to
Okay,
know if I
okay.
remembered or
Yeah.
not.
So we left here in the Travco camper, which we've talked
Yes,
about.
he was. Yeah.
When we went to
Yeah,
Pop's place and
yeah,
went to
yes,
Canada's,
yeah.
yes, I
And it was
remember
a-
that.
it was the
'Cause
only family
that's when the
reunion.
snake came out of charcoal
Yes,
bag on
yes,
you.
yeah. Well, it's-
That was about.
But
70,
I do remember. I was little.
That was about 73, 74, somewhere in there.
So we leave
Yeah.
here, and I think Daddy went with us.
Yes, he
on,
did.
on the initial
He did.
voyage out
Yeah,
there.
because the Michigan race was involved somewhere in the middle of this.
Yes, because we get there, and either Daddy flew to Michigan or whatever, but we get to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and wherever the family reunion was. We also went to Boys Town, Nebraska, because it's right
Yep.
across the river. But then Daddy went either back home or whatever, I can't remember. And then we went up through Minnesota, up around Lake Superior, into Canada, and took, it was about a week, and Pop went with us. That was probably one of the only vacations a man ever took. But after we left, and
Oh no, he spent a long time at Holden Beach.
well, I know, but I mean, they were on a part-time gig here for a while. But anyway, so we met his mother, and Angel and all them was gonna get on our butts because I can't remember her name, but we went around and come through Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and come down
we went down into Missouri
the Upper Peninsula.
because I remember.
Well, that
going-
was up, going up.
Okay, 'cause I
but
remember-
coming
I remember-
back down, and then we
remember
went to
Yeah,
Michigan.
Well, I got vague memories. I was like 4 or 5 years old, but I remember parts of it. But obviously, I'm not going to remember
In Canada,
what you did.
they had this canned bacon.
Okay,
And-
so
and
now I'm
so,
not going to remember
you know,
this.
Mama and Nana and Pop, they were all, cooking in the camper. And I just I couldn't get over that their bacon came in cans, But,
Hey, but back talking about Pop Red working at Bud Moore's, it was always cool after them races, and we all talk about the lunches they'd carry, but, you'd eat after the race, too. And there would be Pop Red there, and they had uniforms, as with other teams.
His RC
Yeah.
uniform.
Yeah,
Okay.
to me, that was always
so
cool
the
stuff.
bacon deal was the segue into the other story we got about him.
Oh, that was later in life.
I know, but let's just go ahead and tell it because it's.
All right, so every time you go to Atlanta or Talladega,
And we'd stop and see them.
you would stop and see them at least one way, if not both ways.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, anyways, we was helping Butch Mott. But what year was that? 93?
93.
It was on up in there.
We was trading off. We'd go on
Pop
weekends.
was pretty much
93.
almost retired.
Timmy would change tires for him, and me and Richie, I guess, just went along. Was pit sport, but it was a good reason for us to go. But our friends from Randleman, Tex Evans,
Lambert.
Franklin Lambert.
Yep.
Anyways, that's who we rode with, and we stopped off and visited them. Well, all
Ken
through,
Duane.
Pop always had his friends that got him different stuff, and every time he'd come town, he'd bring you like eggs or bacon or stuff like that, and you'd say, "Where you get that from, Pop?" "I can't tell you my sources." Wouldn't tell you where it come from. So anyway, so we stop off and visit them with Franklin and Tex.
The double yolked eggs too. That was
Yeah.
a big deal. And it was
But
right
so,
up here too.
so we're riding home from Atlanta race with Franklin Lambert, Tex Evans, and God bless it,
Roger Heifel probably.
Franklin's wife.
Pat.
Yeah, Miss Pat. But anyways, so we go up in our Nana and Pop's house. We're like, "Can y'all stop for 15 minutes
And it was late
to
and
visit
they
our
were
grandparents?"
About,
and they
it was bedtime.
and they said, "Yeah, we know them. We'll stop." So we come in, and Nana was like, "Oh, let your friends come on in the door." And as they walk in, there stood Franklin, and Pop Red goes, "By God, there's my bacon man."
We're like,
So Pop's bacon source had lived within 5 miles of us all our life, and we didn't know that was the bacon
and
man.
we'd go to his restaurant and eat.
Yeah, but by God, there's my bacon man. Anybody that knows Red Myler knows he'd say stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Man.
So anyway, that's why I kind of told the Canadian.
But again, we was lucky to know Pop in the time we did. Unfortunately, we didn't get the.
We didn't know when to ask the right questions.
Well, and
That's why.
but his career was ending, ours was, or his racing was ending, ours was starting,
right.
so to speak.
And he come in after he retired. He moved up here to Greensboro, and he would come visit us.
Oh, that was great when
Yeah,
they moved
he'd
up
come
here.
in here,
Yeah.
and he would actually help us with some rear ends and stuff for the late models and do some things. But I didn't realize how important he was in racing until after he died. And man, there's so many questions I had for that man.
We done a lot for us, and
Yeah.
I guarantee you he'd have done
Now,
more if we'd asked
Remember
him.
1975? I believe it was 75 at Talladega, and that's when Tiny Lund got killed.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most upset I ever seen the man. Pop Red was a tough guy. I mean, tough nut. And that
And we
bothered
didn't
me.
understand why Pop was crying.
Right.
And,
But he rode home with us,
Yeah,
right? Didn't we?
because
Didn't we
they
drive him
went
back to
in whatever
Spartanburg? Yep.
vehicle they were in, and Mama come and said, "Y'all need to be on your best behavior because Pop's upset. He's lost one of his best friends."
Yep.
And we didn't really know the significance then, but
No, now I understand it completely because they come down south together,
Yep.
and they were best of friends. I mean, even later in life, Pop, like you talking about Tiny's fish camp, Pop and Nana did go over and eat with them.
For
all
sure.
through. Yeah, that was a big deal. So
and
yeah,
there's some around Bowling Springs and Spartanburg area, and I mean, even when my kids was young, we'd go to the fish camps with Nana and Pop.
So that was kind of a because I was 6 years old or something when 75. I wasn't very
And
old.
he was that was about as quiet as I ever remember
Yeah.
Pop being on the way back to Spartanburg that night.
I do remember Mom saying y'all that your Pop's friend died, but
Yeah.
again,
And they're gonna ride home with us, so and we took them home.
Yep. Well, anything else?
Well,
shoot,
we got to end it on a happy note. I mean,
well, it's all happy. I mean, we could sit here for the next 3 days and tell Nana and Pop stories,
yeah, for sure.
whether it was family stories or
here's
racing
well,
stories.
we're missing all these. Well, no, I'm
Yeah,
saying
here we go.
he got run over.
Okay,
Mark-
Oh yeah,
Martinsville.
big story.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
so they dropped the jack.
It was in Martinsville. I guess what 60, probably 1960, because the Richards car had come into pits, and the way I understand it, they was having to put rear end grease in the thing because it done burnt the rear end grease out. So they jacked it up, and he's putting the rear end grease in, and for some reason the jack dropped or something, but they took off. The car spun wheels across his chest
and burnt the hide off.
He had like second-degree burns on him, but he was lucky because they thought it was going to break some ribs and all that. But he just got out of there with some burns. And I think they told him. Man. I think I was reading an article on this a while back, and I think he said for him to take off about 2 weeks. Well, he took off about 2 days. He was at the race that weekend. So
no kidding.
Yeah.
He's a pretty tough fella.
Oh yeah. So, anything else?
You got any more?
Well, I mean, like I said, we could talk forever about Pop Red. Need to get some. Anybody that knows Pop Red and works with Pop Red and want to come down and be on our show, give us a holler. Right?
Well,
I mean, I want to hear what other people said about working with Pop Red and stuff.
Please comment on it because he had a lot more friends than we even knew.
Right. Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
So like and subscribe and stay with us.
We'll see you next time.